Hello and welcome to another edition of Education for Today. My name is Evan Ortlieb, and today we're going to be talking about common qualitative coding techniques, all the basics to get you up and running. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So as you can see, there are a number of different ways to collect qualitative data. We've talked about that before: interviews, surveys, observations, and even focus groups. Now, once you've gathered that data, that's when we have to think about what do we do with it. And one of the things that we have to do is make sense of that data through a coding process. There are a number of different coding techniques that we're going to get in today. The first is open coding. We're going to get into that in a minute. But coding in general, to define it, is the process by which distinct concepts and categories are formed. So you may have master headings, and then you may subdivide those into further and further more distinct categories, if you will. As I said, the first type of coding is open coding. And here, researchers are often trying to highlight using different colors, for instance, to distinguish between broad concepts and those that are more narrow in focus. So if you look at the picture at the top of the screen here, you can see a transcript with some highlights. And from there, they took pieces of those. Literally, you can break your page into strips. You can come up with a coding journal, if you will. You can use anecdotal records to make sense of that. And then you're going to try to break down multiple instances that of those transcripts that fall into those respective codes. As the third point says, what you should have at the end of this is perhaps 3 to 5 different colors of highlighted text for you to continue to go back to your original source and to try to find more information that fit into those codes. You're going to transfer these into a brief outline at the end that really guides your further write-up and overall analysis of your data. For instance, let's say that you had a research project and you were looking at what types of student interaction occurred during the month of March for 5th graders during the day. How did this process vary between hybrid or face-to-face or even online environments? And what other factors influence the process of student forums within those spaces? And as you can see on the right side of the page, you have a number of different main categories: processes, feedback, participation, student perspectives, and the overall community. And within those, you have subcategories. So for instance, on student perspective, they have expectations, they had different emotions, they had different instances where they were seeking assistance and even making some gains. And so that's the process of trying to find those subcategories that you can then further flesh out with specific examples. The second type of coding within qualitative research is axial coding. And in axial coding, you're using concepts or categories that are already pre-established. So perhaps you had a text already that just said, here are the categories I want to guide your observations, or you had some kind of observational template already in place with some predetermined categories, and you were trying to look from those categories, what are instances that really elucidate those. With that said, axial coding oftentimes is a secondary coding process to open coding. So you could have a transcript analysis, let's say of interviews that you did with those 5th graders. You could then take those open codes and then further start to see what are the relationships within those using axial coding. So for instance, the image at the top right of your screen here, it shows pedagogy, and there are a number of different related categories such as teaching methods and also activities. And then within those, looking at the relationships between those categories, such as didactic and or teacher-led types of pedagogy. To differentiate these pretty clearly, on the left-hand side, you can see here that open codes are simply categories that data fall into without showing the relationships between them. Whereas the axial coding paradigm really thinks about what are these categories, but also what are the interrelationships between and within those. Also, there's a third type of coding we're not going to get into today that is selective coding, where you would take some of these and dive deeper into those or for further study. So you would sort of narrow the scope of your overall study. But in some ways, that's a more advanced technique than today's time permits. Again, if you have further questions about qualitative coding processes, and overall common analytical procedures within the qualitative domain, feel free to reach out anytime. I hope that this video has been helpful to you as we get started learning the basics and the foundations of coding processes within qualitative research. Again, my name's Evan Ortlieb, and this is Education for Today.